Good morning. Dr. R. Michael Fisher here, and another session on the psychiatric experiencing. What I want to focus on today is I think, one of the most primary, often underestimated by the profession of psychiatry and or just general psychotherapy, underestimated the foundation of all neuroses and psychoses, more or less. Again, I know there's organic potential, genetic aspects, there's the trauma aspects to how people end up in what we'll just call psychiatric experiencing of one kind or another, depending how extreme or not, doesn't matter. What my concern is how we enter in the domain of analysis and what is the role of domination and submission. In other words, the conflict of the dominating forces that are in one's life and how we can be victimized to that and then play out submissive patternings to that domination because of how we handled that situation of domination. And there's many situations of domination continually that we experience as humans, especially in oppressive societies. But also how that submission pattern can turn into another domination pattern. And that's basically what I'm going to argue today. I'll just mostly give examples, not a lot of theorizing today, but give examples of how I have learned intuitively again and through some guidance from readings and studies, of how to work with this domination, conflict, fear, and violence combination. So let's just review that very briefly. Domination, conflict, fear, violence. DCFV theory. This was the final product, that I came up with at the end of my master's dissertation in adult education. So not a dissertation, but a master's thesis. But it had been something I'd been working on for a long time. So that was much later in my life, in my late 40s, when I did that master's degree. And I really went into the study of conflict. And I did just a massive transdisciplinary approach, an integral holistic approach, but particularly tracing out how our society, so I'm going to talk about this modern Western society I live in particularly, and I'm speaking particularly about someone who's a white person living as a male in that society and how I've come to understand that world all these years, is that we do conflict in not so good a ways. So that would be the bottom thesis. Not only not good ways, but actually undermining ways. And the problem is you can't really blame anybody. It's just that we don't do conflict well. And so, okay, so you say, well, that's not a big deal. There's people doing conflict resolution, conflict management training, blah, blah, blah. But in the psychotherapeutic and the psychiatric experiencing, that's where I want to turn the analysis, the lens, into analysis of conflict there. Okay, so yes, we could be talking about all the other kinds of conflict resolution, management, mediation stuff that goes on. But that's another topic. And I'm really interested in the deeper roots of the injury that comes through domination-submission relations. Bottom line. So quickly, the theory, I argue in the DCFV theory that domination exists and will exist as long as you are with other organisms, including, let's just talk about being with our same species at the moment. That's the focus here, humans with humans, is that domination will exist, always has existed. And so I'm not interested in any particular theories or ideas or ideologies, ideals, that there will just be pure peace and there will not be domination. So I'm not heading for that. I'm not interested in that as the trajectory of a curriculum, of that as the trajectory of a therapeutic process as either. I say the first thing we really have to come to realize is how real domination is. So, second part of the theory, and I'm making this extremely short because it would be a long lecture on just that theory alone, and I've written about it as well, so you can pursue that with me or just do some reading around my work. The second part from domination of the theory that unfolds is that with domination, there will be conflict. Now, I'm arguing actually there's some domination that will happen that is not because of conflict. It is that domination exists because we take up space, and different organisms take up different space, and not all creatures can share space equally at every moment in time perfectly. So, in other words, some creatures step on your toes, and could be a lot worse than stepping on your toes. So you're dominated more or less in all kinds of situations. You then have a response system within you, and I believe this is completely built into all organisms, is you can respond in a conflict mode. Your domination creates the energy for and the patterning for, whoa, no, I want to defend myself. So the very natural instinctive defense system is a conflict management system. It's especially when, again, we're talking about two creatures, two humans come together. There is a conflict when there's domination. All right. So far, so good. In other words, you could have a healthy system of domination with conflict processes that are learned, that are supported, that are shared, that some are instinctive, and so on, that just are allowed to play out a conflict between that particular domination and submission relation in that moment. So it's kind of like I see that as an ecological unit. It's not anything against each other necessarily at this point. There's no enemy necessarily at this point. That's more a pathological system, and that can turn that way. Here's why. So the theory basically says, let the conflict then happen. It will happen. We will have conflict as long as there's domination. Again, you can see I'm not heading for any kind of peace narrative here or idealism. So in that sense, I'm looking for good conflict education in societies. How do we raise our offspring to handle conflict? Get to that in a moment. What I call the so-called terrible twos syndrome and the problem of the rebel that we don't handle well in a society that has a lot of domination but won't admit that that creates conflict, and they won't do a lot of good conflict work. They suppress it, hide it, and or re-injure any kind of attempt to do the conflict work. And that's deadly, and that will turn to neuroses and psychoses of various kinds when the conflict work is not done. So it's not totally new that conflict is important, and psychoanalysis, for example, is based on conflict, as are other psychological systems. That yes, we have to deal with certain inner conflict with our parents that we never dealt with, and so on. So it's not like it's totally new, but you can see I'm putting it together with this really overt understanding that we live in a dominating and submissive society, master and slave kind of idea that Hegel talked about and others have talked about, that is important dynamic that we have to work out. All right, so where does the rest of the F and the V theory come in? F stands for fear. So if we do the conflict really well under the situations of domination, submission, that relational unit, that ecology of that unit will do good fear work. In other words, fear will come up through conflict. It's a challenging space. No organism likes conflict in a way, right? It includes a lot of aggression, one way or another. You can even call it assertiveness, but I'm just going to say no, aggression is deeply there. When conflict is going on, you require aggression. So I don't say aggression again is bad. So I don't use any kind of ideological idealism there. I just say let it work. Let it work through a good conflicting process. And then the domination submission can be reconciled, more or less. That's the ideal of the theory, that we will, and then we'll bring the system back to more or less an equilibrium, a certain adjustment of what we'd even call a just system of relations. But that takes a lot of work. You got to go through the D, the C, the F. You got to do the fear work as well. So how to do that is a very complex, and that's not part of this video. Fear work is my specialty with conflict beside it. And then on the other extreme is if the fear work is not done well, if the fear work is denied and suppressed, which then suppresses the good conflict work, then you will end up with V, violence. And that is the ultimate outcome of this aggression, right? Right from the domination move into feeling like you've been aggressed against, transgressed against, had your toes step on in some way, your dignity assaulted in some way, etc., etc. And that can sometimes be accidental, sometimes it can be very systematic, that kind of oppression. And then with the violence coming out, that will come out because the parties in this ecology of DCF will ultimately not be satisfied. There will be a repression cycling in there of the energy of that aggression to respond to the original domination. And that will just continually turn into a toxicity. And then there will be a reaction at some points of violence, both against the one dominating, more or less. And if that's not totally safe, then the aggression will come out to someone who's adjacent to or less threatening to attack in the system, and or even just someone to attack just because they're randomly in the area of where this discharge of the aggression needs to go. And or then the last, of course, more complex and subtle is when you get self-attack, when it doesn't feel safe to attack anybody and aggress against anybody in the system, you attack and aggress against yourself. And that is what we call self-abusive behavior or self-undermining behaviors. And that has a whole psychology, right, of internalized oppression. So it's another way. It's really internalized domination that wasn't handled well through conflict and fear work, and eventually ends up in a violence syndroming that just keeps reproducing more violence and more violence. So we are in a violent society, and my argument was with the theory is that we don't do DCFV very well. We don't even understand that dynamic very well. It's certainly not taught when you go into psychiatric school and train, or even just regular school and train to how do we going to handle being with others on this planet. Okay, enough theory. Let's get into some examples in my walking through and stumbling through the world of these interesting dramas. So you'll notice I'm talking about a drama on dramatization here. A rehearsal is another term that I like to use and others have used. That this psychodrama of domination-submission relations is played out in so many dramatic ways, minor and very overt. So let me get to a psychiatrist, because that's the focus of interest in psychiatry and psychiatric experiencing. One of the very first psychiatrists I met, and this would be probably in the mid 80s, was in a workshop, and I had gone to it. I don't remember exactly where it was. I went with somebody and I don't remember who it was. So it was a long time ago, for 40 years. And they started and set up a circle. So it was a psychiatrist, an older fellow with his wife, partner, and they were both clinically trained. And as I say, I remember him being a psychiatrist, as I was told, and I was curious. Oh, wow, I'm going to do a workshop with a psychiatrist. That'll be interesting. But he's of the alternative, at that time, alternative or transpersonal. It had a spiritual component, which is what I was interested in at the time. And it ended up being a very simple early workshop where I began to have my first experience of, I'm not just a nice guy. Oh, and other people I think are nice are not just nice. So he called it also shadow work. And that way back then was not too commonly tossed around. Since then, more and more people have used the term shadow work. And so here's how he started. He put us into a circle with a partner, So we were sitting in pairs, but we are all kind of in a circle so we could kind of watch and share with each other what was going on. And he did a demonstration. So he chose somebody in the circle who was willing to demonstrate. And he said, I'm basically going to do a demonstration where we're going to slap each other in the face. Everybody in the circle by that time was like, oh, really? Okay, is that what we're doing? And I don't remember what the title of the workshop is, why we all went, but regardless of that, I wish I could remember. That was his first activity, and it was definitely a surprise to most all of us sitting there. We're going to be slapping each other, and hard, he said. So he did get a volunteer, and I think it was a woman, which was really interesting. And they just sat across from each other, and he basically took a long time, carefully setting up the environment for what we would today maybe call safe. Back then, never used that language. Oh, we're going to create a safe space here. I find we're absolutely neurotic and hyper static about creating safe spaces now. It's become such a formation for doing therapeutic work and or this deep domination submission work, to the point where I think it undermines actually some of the really good deep work that can happen much quicker if you are not totally always setting up so much time and energy on safe. And the problem with doing all that safe is that it just kind of reinforces itself that we're supposed to be safe, which basically means nice. For the most part, you may say, well, maybe it's not. Sometimes we slip and we can, yeah, and sometimes we're encouraged to be angry in groups and so on, psychotherapeutic groups, but not really. It's already contained with basically be polite, be nice, and respect other people's boundaries and all these other rules. Now, I'm not even going to get into the long conversation about how many rules you need to have in a psychotherapeutic treatment system or a therapy office, etc., or just doing this in groups like we did in experiential workshops. Longer topic about all of that setting the stage, right? So let's go back to this real experience, and it was powerful watching, them do this slapping, and basically it's he slaps her, and then he just gently puts down his hand and allows her to then smack him full force as much as they can. And there's a special way to do the slapping so that you don't injure certain parts of the face. You hit in a certain way, you hit with a certain open part of your hand here, and so on. So those features built in, it's not chaos, and it's very ordered. And of course, you're watching this and you're going, this is like martial arts. This is like learning to take the hit. Learning to be tossed down is as important as learning to toss the other down. And you do it in an equal exchange. So this began, again, I got into doing it. And of course, people will really break down even with the thought of hitting another person. Like, I think I cried too, and my partner I was with broke down crying, and you just were with each other and you sort of see that, you listen to what it brings up for people, right? So it was a therapeutical deep listening with each other, but going through that kind of an intensity of domination submission, the potential for a dominant act, slapping of another in that moment of dominating, but the other being willing to receive and play back the conflict energy, the natural responsive energy, which is to slap back just as hard. And I'm actually saying that's natural. Anything traditionally conditioned and taught is if someone slaps you, be nice and peaceful and be loving and not like your one that's hitting you, you will receive it and you will not slap back. You might say, oh, I find that offensive, or some kind of other self-talk of so-called self-empowering exercise. Well, what I loved about that exercise was back then it was so raw. It's so just no, you slap back. That's how it moves. You step on my toe, I'll step on yours, unless you finally get off, and so on. So this will get to some other experiences I've had personally, with what I would call psychiatric processing that individuals are going through, and are very aggressive themselves, and I was required, both as a receiver of and in the environment of those highly aggressive behaviors in the realm of the highly neurotic, psychotic, narcissistic, etc., those energies and powers being, played out in those dramatizations, I had to learn, right? So this is what I'm talking about with the slapping exercise. It was my first really stepping into learning. I had to learn to be aggressive, and it was okay to do it, especially in this condition. It was easier because we were practicing, but I also had to learn to do it when it's free form, street fighting, etc. So street fighting I'll get to. And that can bring up so much stuff for people who have been victimized by violence, physical violence, particularly, we'll talk about and focus on here. That's what I'm focusing on in the video. Of course, it has an emotional component, and just to scream and yell at somebody is actually very physical. The force of the energy, the body, the wind in the room, the chemicals of that assault are real and physical as well. They're vibratory energetically. They go right through you, so to speak. It's like a knife, right? Even if the person's not got a knife and they don't touch you. So you can do it through your eyes, you can do it through the voice, you can do it through physical gesture, and of course, then you can do it through hitting in some way, or grabbing, hurting. So I got my first experience. That's my point. And it opened up my eyes. It opened up the eyes of a lot of people who were there, including a lot of therapists that were in the room in that training, as I remember, and that they had never really learned how to deal with the violence within them, the ability to slap back. And when I say violence in them, I really mean aggression in them. And when aggression is not handled well through conflict and fear work processes, as I said in the theory, that aggression turns into a much nastier aggression, which I would call is really where the violence is, because it's a violation you will do to somebody to get back at them, but you don't realize you're actually being violent because you think they're the violent one and you're just kind of defending yourself. But actually, you sort of submerged and repressed the violence in you, the full aggression in you, to the point that after a while the violence comes out and it just kind of looks normal, and you can defend it rationally. Well, you're an asshole, fuck you. Things like that, which are absolutely of no value, more or less, to what I'm talking about is this good DCFV work, this DCFV work. So all of that aside, let's move on. The slapping really scares the shit out of people. And that's the fear work. You got to do that terror work of, oh my gosh, I actually am capable to do this. And some people couldn't do it. So they would just be so limp. And then other therapeutic processes were done with them, using what the facilitator did. But he was trying to get us all to get to that point in a couple of hours of workshop to do the slapping. All right. And of course, it's all done in love and compassion. Yeah. It's done in what I would call a fearlessness paradigm. All right. Well, let's move on to a story that, and it's not really a story, it's a theory, and it's a wonderful philosophy by Shogam Trungpa, who was one of my earliest teachers. So I found this book in the late 70s on somebody's shelf, and I started scanning through it. And that time I didn't know anything about sacred warriorship. Here it's called The Sacred Path of the Warrior. Tibetan Buddhist, so won't go into the teachings of Shogam Trungpa Rinpoche, the late, he's no longer alive, but started a huge movement in North America as a teacher guru, or this Shambhala training. And the sacred warrior became really interesting in the back of my mind, and it was only years later when I started In Search of Fearlessness Center in 1989. I've talked about my other two psychiatric videos here, that training became a school of sacred warriorship. So I talked about that in the other videos. So that is, again, connected with the martial arts in the schools of human wisdom, spiritual wisdom, that knew it is so important to learn to grapple, to wrestle with the demons of human aggression, this natural human spiritedness that can be assertive to aggressive to, yes, it can be violent, it can kill. We are made to kill. We are predators at heart, as are most all organisms, a type of predatory. We all have the ability to eat the other, kill and eat the other for the purposes of survival. Welcome to nature, capital N. It is based on not only cooperative systems and care, but it is based on predation. We eat, we kill, we delete others for our purpose of gain. How to handle all that in a system is part of cultural evolution. It's part of being a sacred, vulnerable species that we feel a lot for the other. So that's human. Other species have that too. I won't argue that they don't. But humans have it in hyper degree of this sensitivity to the other and the sensitivity to injuring them, the sensitivity to being aware we can kill them any moment and take them out forever, gone, that we have that power. And of course, the more weaponry you have and create, the cultures, the society, the more you can do that quickly and efficiently and violently. So we have to deal with this, and it is a huge psychiatric issue about how we handle and deal with and heal, recover from violence. All right. Next example was Gerald Jampolsky, a psychiatrist that I read again in the early 90s. Interesting book. I don't have the name with me at this time, but he was kind of a loved guy. And connected with the Course in Miracles teachings and healing and all very kind of new agey human potential discourse and his popularity. However, he did write a book about some of his early psychiatric experiences in the mental health area and in mental hospitals where he worked as obviously training as a psychiatrist and working there. So that's what I was really interested to share today. One brief story, very simple, but it taught me a really, again, powerful lesson. I'm just, again, learning in an unconscious way about how to be a cultural psychiatrist, if you will. So Jampolsky talks about there was a very difficult client. He was a large man. They had to often have him wrapped up in the restraint suits, highly dosed at times, right, to keep him down. That's what the psychiatric wards tend to do. Let's keep all the aggressivity down here, people. And you get weird behaviors, and a lot of those are accepted as part of being in a mental hospital. But the ones that are really not cool is when you're aggressive toward others and or yourself. So the whole psychiatric system, I would argue, is about suppression of aggressivity. This you can see, that psychiatric motif, right? That performative control of the drama, of the acting out and the dramatizing and healing potential of conflict, fear, violence, and all that domination that goes with it, submission, that has hurt and injured these peoples. So that's what the institution ends up playing out, and it becomes much more like a jail or prison where you're constantly controlling the aggressivity, potentials for violence, right, of the mates, the inmates. That's why they're in cells. That's why the guards wear equipment that can hurt you, like a big long stick, like a gun. And they can take you out if need to, injure you, to maim you from being aggressive and assertive. See what I'm saying? The whole system of criminology, and I'm going to really be touching on that today in the last part of the video with a couple of clients I've worked with. It is about suppressing DCF and obviously not handling and improving the violence issue very well overall. Jampolsky goes into the story he tells in a book. He walks into the ward that day, and the staff are all upset in the hospital, and they're saying, "Oh, so and so, so and so, we've got his door locked, but he's just losing it. And he's throwing stuff all over the room. He's trying to break this and break that, and he's threatening any staff that try to go in there with syringes." And they're saying, "So, what do you think, Doc? Should we go in and tackle him and shoot him up with a chemical that will put him more or less to sleep?" Well, because Jampolsky had worked with this client for quite a while, he says, "Well, let's not do that this time. We've done that, and we've controlled him a few times." He says, "I'd like to try something different." And he basically argues in the book that if a psychiatrist is not trying something different, and the staff who work with them, the psychiatric nurses, the other doctors, the therapists, the group therapy leaders, etc., in these mental institutions, if you're not trying and doing something different all the time, at least to some degree, you also have to have a lot of repetition for folks that are that highly distressed. So it's this interesting combination. You need a lot of repetition. They feel a certain kind of repetitive, ritualistic control in that, and that can sort of help keep them regulated. But then you got to be able to get to a place where you're also working to dysregulate them on purpose. In other words, you're going in to actually disrupt them, because that's where he argues, and I argue, that's where I've seen the best work happen, is when you risk to disrupt that which you think, "Oh, it'd be better if we just kept it calm," then they seem to be healthier. Okay, that's a very complex dynamic, and it's an art of how to do that. That's the martial art of knowing how to work with your opponent. The opponent being the defenses. Not that the defenses are bad, but the defenses have gone too far. It's an argument I made in other videos on the psychiatric here. So you can check those videos out too, if you want to understand more about what I mean by defenses and their overrun. Jampolsky goes in and he says, "Well, I'm going to try something different." So he unlocks the door, and the staff are saying, "Okay, we'll go in with you." And he said, "No, don't come with me." So that now he's already kind of probably broken the hospital rules of you take 4 people with you when you got somebody in a florid psychotic experiencing, and they're going wild basically, and they're violent, and they've got a weapon in their hand. I can't remember what the weapon was, but this person had a weapon, and we're flashing it through across by the window and the door and so on and so on, screaming, doing all the violence, acting out. But Jampolsky said, "No, let me go in alone." Okay, staff are not happy about this, but Jampolsky's in charge. He goes in and he said, "Lock the door behind me," so that the client hears the door being locked. Key. Don't come in and I'll be standing there and I'm going to go in and be the brave one, right? Confronting this very violent individual, working through their domination conflict, submission problems of being also locked up in a hospital. Let's talk about submission. Who's dominating? Well, Gerald Jampolsky, the doctor, even though they know each other and have obviously made some progress in getting to know each other and trust each other, still he is the owner. Jampolsky owns the territory. He calls the shots. He opens the door. He brings in the troops to play to finalize, and if we need to stick the patient with this chemical that will completely make them submission. You can just see what's powerfully playing out in the domination submission relations, this ecology, which is terrifying. It cannot not be terrifying to, let's just take the individual experiencing, but also Jampolsky says it's terrifying for the staff. It's terrifying for him. And he said the only reason he could go in there and yell is the client heard the door lock. Client knew unconsciously, if even only, that they are now on par, both in a locked room. This is what I call wrestling with the demons. You have to learn how to do that to be a really good psychiatrist or psychotherapist. is my view. And of course, various people will learn that more or less in depth. The sacred warrior learns that ongoing. That is the life training of how to wrestle with the demons, the dark forces, the psychic forces of this great hurt and injury, the trauma, etc., the deep toxicities of existence in a human psyche. And he basically, I can't remember all the details of how he intervened, but he basically yelled to this guy. He called out his name and he said, "You're scaring the hell out of us." Now, that's not the same as what you'd expect, right? The doctor of authority going into the room, and you'd sort of expect, "Joe, are you okay? Can we do anything for you?" No, that's all the humanistic psychology approach. He's going in with a really interesting directive, and I've used it myself with a client I'll share very briefly in a minute. So he basically went in and just said, "You're scaring the shit out of all of us." And then you just give them really good attention, not judgmental. You're basically saying, "This is creating fear for everybody, including you, buddy, even though you're holding the knife and you're going crazy and your adrenaline's so high right now, you won't even remember what you did or could do to injure, damage. But the point being, you're still scaring everybody." And his logic, like mine, is humans don't want to be in a fear state for very long at all. The whole system works to move us to fearlessness, to get us to re-equilibrate back to a fairly, undistressed condition relatively. So he's was working a very complex dynamic there. One could analyze that case further. I won't. So I had a client who was a 16-year-old. I think he was actually only 15, but he was huge. He was like a football player, 15-year-old. He was like bigger than most of the staff, bigger than me. He was out of control at home and came into our Quest Ranch services as a residential client because he was always beating up his mother's new boyfriend. Next one come in, and he's like beating them up. And he's like a 14-year-old boy, but he had the capability to be. Why? Because he went wild. So this is where wildness, it becomes the new drama. You can find this animal nature in you. You're vulnerable like this boy was. He was very injured, probably had definitely a psychiatric problem. Was not diagnosed at that time at 14, but he just couldn't control his violence when he would erupt. Otherwise, he was a really nice guy, like generally quite tame, and he wanted to be friendly, and he wanted people to like him, but most people didn't like him because he was so big. And then when he lost it through his anger and rage, he basically just scared everybody, including his mom and his dad. So they were constantly having to call the police in to get control of him. Well, the kid builds up a very deep patterning of, I basically can scare the shit out of anybody. And I'm only 14 and I'm scared shitless about life. I don't know how to handle this. And that's what the rage is, right? It's a desperation to rage out, to try to just get attention, to try to control the world you don't know how to control. And you so need help to learn how to do that. Well, those are the individuals that word therapy is so ineffective with, because you need to engage them at the rage level. So that's why, again, this aggressivity, impulsing, you have to learn to tackle with that and engage with it. And that's what I did one day when this young 14-year-old was in his room and he had locked the door from the inside in this trailer, small bedroom, and we heard him. He was just, again, it was another one of what we just kind of, the staff would call his fits. And he's bashing walls with his fist. He had a baseball bat in there. He was bashing the windows. Possibly he was going to try to escape out the window, but by this time he's making so much noise, there's no escape. If he was silent and escaped, then he'd get away, and he probably could have climbed out the window easily. but now he's like making this huge drama, right? And it was just like quote a wild animal, an ape in a cage, and it really was an animal caged up inside him, a demon that he could not control and that scared him, and that's why he had a weapon. He needs to scare everybody else away from him. And you just can't even imagine all the logics and twisted logics of that behavior pattern he has. It's a double bind because he's asking for help, but at the same time he's threatening to kill his help. And he doesn't even know why he's doing that. He's just literally acting it out in this irrational patterning of fear-based, neurotic, semi-psychotic. Now, he didn't have obviously mental health problems, but I would say he probably was building toward what would become a narcissistic disorder, a massive controller of other people and a manipulator. So this young man, again, I went in, I just knew, let me go alone. You guys can stand outside, staff outside the door. And if you hear anything, I'll call for you if I need. And I just went inside alone. Well, nobody wanted to go in there when that guy was bashing that batter, that huge guy, and we'd seen the damage he'd caused before. So again, you see, he'd built up the threat pattern, but because I didn't work there every day and I wasn't the front end staff, I had this free access, and I could be in my kind of warrior self in this kind of sacred place with him. And he didn't know me that well, but I had worked with him a few times in the office, and didn't really get very far with him therapeutically. He just wasn't capable. He's like too young, and so I was just basically working with a body, that didn't have a lot of cognitive capacities to be reflective on himself. But I worked with his body, and I felt like I could do something useful. I just guessed, and because I had read the Jem Polsky, I'd been through other these experiential slapping and violent exercises of working with my own violence, I knew I was capable to act my aggression to the nth degree if I needed to, even though physically I don't know if I could have ever handled this individual. He was so much bigger and heavier than I was, and wilder. But I knew it in me that I had a wildness too. And so when I went in, I can't remember exactly what I said to him, but it was similar to what Jan Polsky would do. I said something he did not expect to hear. And in the moment, I just held my hand out, which didn't even ask him to give me the bat. I just had my hand out. But that was after I delivered a really strong, powerful, energetic, assertive, aggressive nudge. But it wasn't about demeaning him. It wasn't trying to put him down. It wasn't about trying to tell him to calm down. No, none of that. It was just a straight, powerful message to him. I am here now in the room with you. Again, not in words. I said it in some way I don't remember. Something probably to do with enough scaring. This is like scaring everybody. But I can't act out, my fear of him and then try to control him. I have to just acknowledge it together, validate it, and then reach my hand out to receive the bat. And he put it in my hand gently. He knew, right? So this is a kind of communication that I just thought was so great. And he did calm down very quickly. And then other staff could work with him at that point, do what they needed to do. The other time of really importance for me to be aggressive, and again, this is not about being nice. I have obviously been conditioned, even though I was a fighter as a young person. I had lots of anger and rage that I acted out. My brother did too. So it wasn't like our home was a nice, peaceful home, and I wasn't told to be nice and peaceful. So I had that luxury, as a working poor young boy in rough neighborhoods where I had to really learn to survive, and you have to learn to fight to do that. You have to learn to be aggressive for the most part. Otherwise, you're going to be bullied more or less. Doesn't happen to everybody, but it happens to a lot if you don't learn to put up your boundaries, right? It's full kind of physical and emotional. You just got to be able to arise that predator hunter in you, the fighter in you, to when you need it. So I wasn't out of control with that energy, but I definitely had it. and I knew I could use it. So again, as an adult, had to learn to bring it back because I had been so conditioned as an adult. And certainly for lots of reasons, I was in the New Age peace movement and all of that, and everybody was trying to be peaceful and harmonious. And I did all that open-hearted love, connection stuff. So you do a lot of that work for a while, and you do too much of it, you lose your ability to be actually aggressive, and to the point where you can be violent in an instant when you need to be, um, but aware that you are. So this is the sacred warrior. This is the Shambhala training, and it's more than that. It's just really being a live, wild creature that we are and are capable of. And it's a great intelligence, and it really works to help others who are aggressive and using you, abusing you, controlling and manipulating you, and mastering over you because they are able to access their wild, dramatic self, aggressivity, violence, the threat of it, the hate that comes through their eyes and that they tell you through their mouths and words. They can manipulate and control you and pin you. And that is like the demon that can pin you and make you its pet. Um, Even though you're trying to be peaceful and loving and throwing love and prayers back to them, whatever, it doesn't work. Not really. Not to really work out that domination submission ecology. More complex discussion there, but what I did with my ex first wife was she utilized her in her psychotic, semi psychotic states. She utilized aggression all the time. Otherwise, she was, yeah, basically a nice lady. I found she had a little edge of anger all the time and the need to dominate using that emotional anger and put downs. So I felt emotionally abused all those years. But that's what my learning, and I played into it. I have my role in it. But she also just used screaming and yelling, the kind of raging at you to control you. It took me almost 8 years to learn that, to learn what was going on. Because again, I was the nice guy. I was the one that could attend and be, pleasant, try to bring the atmosphere down, try to help her self-regulate, co-regulate with me. And we had children, so I wanted to co-regulate with them. I didn't want the children to be terrified all the time. But reality was I couldn't control that. I couldn't control the amount of terror, fear that she could create easily, by these outbursts, and especially when she was in the psychotic cycling, because she didn't remember the consequences of her actions. And that's when you move into the criminological domain of people who can act out these dramas and performances of high intense, emotional release, cathartic, but have no sense of social responsibility and connection and don't even remember. They're so dissociated psychologically. Very dangerous for criminal behavior. Yeah. And that can be very subtle. And it may not just be legal criminal behavior, it's criminal behavior of assaulting another individual, including your children. So the one night that I was over babysitting, or I think that's what I was doing. I was going over to babysit my two daughters. My wife was going to go out at that time, so we were separated. We'd been separated twice because we tried it a second time to see if we could make it work, and it wasn't going to work, the relationship at that time. My daughters are like 6, 7, and 8 years old or something like that, maybe a little younger. And they're upstairs in the tub, and I'm talking with my wife in the stair at the time, in the stairway, and she's definitely over the top with something I've done, trying to blame me for something. I can't remember what the issue was. And she's just escalating and escalating of a kind of viciousness of attacking me. And I'm trying to be totally cool here, right? So this is my first learning of how to handle the demon in my ex-wife. And what I basically was working with was all the ways that I would try to manipulate women in their emotions. And I'm not saying those are all healthy and good. It's just how I had learned it. But I'd also been learning, because I've been doing a lot of work on myself in these workshops, the slapping workshop, working with the Quest kids, I had been learning also a whole lot of other things that she wasn't learning about how to deal with aggressivity and the ability to defend in a very powerful way as an intervention, not as a violent act to put someone down, but as to say no and stay connected. Stay connected. That's the important thing with the eyes, and not in a terrified way, even though I had terror inside me when I'm attacked like that. I'm able to somehow just come right in between being terrified and acting out, being terrified of this other person, but also showing I am not going to be intimidated by you, no matter what you do. I'm going to come. I'm going to be there. I am going to meet you. Otherwise, if I'm looking away, looking down, victimized, the the violence just keeps pouring out, and they will utilize that. Especially, I say they, the narcissistic type, aggressive, even psychotic, violent, criminal type behaviors and patterns will come out and use you as a victim. They will try to master you. And she did master me emotionally for a long time. Maybe not as much as she thinks, or I think I had definitely some boundaries, but they ultimately, when it came to dealing with our daughters together in the room, it was really hard. I was so vulnerable because I wanted to protect them and I couldn't. And I was very much a slave to her outbursts and control, emotional, otherwise mental abuse. But in this one situation, for various reasons, because I had already been separated, I lived alone, I had my independence, I knew the girls were at least okay, and I had not heard that there was problems, with her being the single mom and going to school, and so I knew enough that it was not totally harming the girls, but I knew emotionally it wasn't a great climate. But for various reasons, I didn't challenge all that. I chose to let her be the mom, main parent, and I was the secondary parent. But in that situation, yelling on the stairs, and I mean, know the girls are listening to this energy and hearing it, and it wasn't going to stop. It was like building, and I wasn't I didn't really have a defense. I mean, I would try to argue with words, but it just feeds the demon, right? And at some point, I just intuitively knew to come out with a huge, loud for about 30, 20 seconds, just intense, just total frustration, but in total control, and then stop after I did that right in her face, and then just looking at her. No, again, diminishment, but just the energy. And I had calmed, right down, even though inside I'm completely stirred up. But my behavior, I showed that I have control of that demon in me, that just met the demon in you and said, there's no way I'm going to let you intimidate me by that yelling, screaming at me. She never did it again. She stopped, she got dressed, walked out. I went upstairs and dealt with the girls and tried to, you know, calm them down, say it was okay, we were doing fine. I just had to, get mad at your your mom back for a moment just so that it was a little bit fair. I think that's what I said to them. They just sort of okay, whatever, and they went on playing. So I share that, and I've got one more story, which is a young client. I'll just call him E, and E was a very challenging young man at the Quest Ranch Treatment Center. Again, I was dealing with really powerful energies with this young man that I had never experienced before or seen of. I've read of people with narcissistic disorders, personality disorder, and or what you just call manipulative, antisocial sociopaths. Now, he was not of the severest case. He was actually a really nice guy, and he was in many reasons in our treatment program because he couldn't function in the world with authorities. He was continually challenging any authority. And he was just, he wasn't a big guy and he wasn't like super threatening or anything like that. But he had this ability to manipulate. He was incredibly clever psychologically. And what I learned out is that him and his mother were in a huge psychological battle. He was protecting his younger sister from this mother who really had probably very serious psychiatric problems. And he had told me she would lock them in the closet in the dark together, burn them with cigarettes as punishment, and used a lot of psychological manipulation. So from a little young boy, he learned to be the protector of his sister from the mother and all the different kinds of male partners that came in and out of that house that I guess probably were pretty scary too. Um, and he just learned how to be a warrior. So that's kind of my bottom line. As I worked with him, I began to treat him and think, okay, I got to treat him as a warrior. So I was the therapist at the time, and staff were having so much difficulty with this boy in residence. And he was a gang leader. He had the capability to gather and gang up everybody, including this real big guy that I talked to you about with the violent, raging behavior. He totally controlled that guy. Not physically, he just controlled him by a mental and emotional um, enslavement. He was so good at, oh, I'll befriend you, I'll get you this, but you do this for me, you do the dirty work. And so there's a huge gang behavior going on. It was terrifying to watch somebody be able to create a gang right in the middle of a treatment center and turned it against staff. He would intimidate, especially female staff, but even some of the male staff, because he would get people to gang up on them. This, not even again physically, but emotionally, mentally. They test, always testing the power and the conviction of the staff and the care of the staff, but at the same time undermining. And so we were just having a nightmare that year of him being in the facility. And I had to really work at how am I going to work with this guy therapeutic. He sort of liked me. Again, I come in only 2 days a week, and I was the magician. I was the Merlin, as he called me, and others the young boys started to call me the Merlin. And so I had a capability to work with them on a different level that right than trying to control their behaviors and get into all that power dynamics of who's dominant, who's got to be submissive now. And so I didn't have to work with that direct, and I was able to get underneath. So I just want to tell you the intervention that I made that was really interesting in helping understand his narcissistic borderline personality disorder. And it turned out to be that I had to work with calling him in the therapy sessions, and I did it non-judgmentally, a pain master. Because I says, look at what you did this week. I'll just use his name, E. Look what you did this week. E, look what you did to so and so. How you terrified her and she quit. She was so scared that night when you gathered some of the boys up and you glaring at her as if you were going to rape her, even though you didn't say you were going to do that, and so on. And look at this, which you caused pain in the, so and so, another peer or whatever. And I says, I think the difficulty is you haven't learned, no one's helped you to learn how to be a pain master. You just used the level you're operating on, I said, is level 2. And there's 4 stages of being a pain master. And you're on level 2 of the pain master path. Would you like to learn? By that time, he's so curious. We were in a therapy session at the time. He wants to know what the 3 and the 4 level is. So he respected me enough to know I was quite a wise person to him. And I wasn't reacting like other people did, in kind of authority, right? And then back, I was really working with the rebel energy and the pain master, the power master, the one who needs to manipulate the world and needs to be a sacred warrior and needs to be able to be violent when you need to be violent, but in control and knowing exactly what you're doing it for. And basically, the first 2 levels, as I went through the map, I'm not going to go through it here today with you. I can't remember all the fine details, but was going from a victim to being a pain master 2 who, created pain in others so that you could control their behaviors. The level 3, I said you have to go through a journey, a gap. It's like the abyss. I was using mythological language to create a heroic journey for him. And E really caught on to this. He was very interested in it. And I said, levels 3 and 4 is when you utilize people's pain to actually bring about healing and ultimately to be compassion. And I said, a Christ-like figure is someone of the level 4 pain master, that they brought such pain awareness into the world. So you think of the cross, this great drama of violence and pain, and suffering and blood and dying on the cross, that created a religion of love and compassion. Theoretically and metaphorically, and as a story and a narrative, this is like highest level of mastery of the sacred warrior, to know how to be a pain master. And that pain, basically, I've been working with him is to reimagine his relationship with pain, where he actually could be therapeutic with his abilities to master other people's pain, to see through people as he did. He could see through people as good as any most therapists I've ever met. And he knew it because he had had so much therapy, and he'd learned how to read and how to understand it. He was reading psychology and therapy books. He told me, he showed me. He would discuss theories with me. But he needed a teacher who could actually see that he needed to keep all his aggressivity, all his sacred warriorness, all of what he put into protecting his daughter, his young sister, and himself psychically as a young boy when no one else could protect them. See, you do never want to destroy that for an individual like that. And of course, danger would be is he would be an absolute brilliant, critical, antisocial person by the time he grew up, and probably be who knows what in the worst of scenarios, what he did in the world. But from the best we knew, after the year and a half we worked with him, and I spent a lot of time with him, invited him into my home as well, and actually did physically wrestling with him using our bodies and power. And I sat on him, I let him sit on me and try to control me, and showed him that I had the full force of my energy I could put up against the full force of his energy. And as a 15, 16-year-old, he just loved having an adult do that with him, who wasn't afraid of him, because he was always intimidating people with it. I'll kill you, da. And he was doing muscle building all the time, so he was very strong. But because I went in there vulnerably with him and still wrestled and put all my energy to him, I gave him all my energies, right? He learned, oh wow, okay, it's like I can meet this guy, like I respect this guy. But had to be embodied, so it couldn't just be words. I did use some words and theory, but ultimately I did quite a bit of physical work with him in actually fighting and using our power against each other. And he loved that competition. And I just respected you as a warrior. See, that was ultimately what I gave you, even though I know you abuse that energy you have, that physicality, that capability you have to use your mind as a weapon to bring up other people's fear, to find their weakness and vulnerability, and dig in there. So eventually I had to show him, you can keep doing that, but the path of your outcome will not probably be good, and you'll never make it to level 3 pain master. And hopefully someday maybe you could make to level 4. I'd love to see that. So I had a vision for him where he didn't have a vision. So I'll end this video on that set of cases. And he, as far as I know, did turn out really quite well and got work and left our facility. But I haven't heard from him in probably 20 years plus. So don't know the actual full outcome of what happened. Okay, I think that's everything I wanted to share today in this, and feel free to put your comments below, and look forward to connecting more.